Well, I have the privilege, you and I have the privilege of meeting Ann Voskamp. Now, Ann doesn't know this, but she's been a mentor, and I consider her a friend of mine for many years as I have read everything that she's written. Her profound use of words to me has stirred my heart in more ways than I can count. And she is a New York Times best-selling author. Her new book, Waymaker, is another masterpiece, but it's also, more importantly, an inspirational story of faith, of perseverance, of finding a way forward where there seems to be no way. So without any delay, welcome to 700 Club Canada, and so privileged to have you here.
Oh, Lori, it is a joy and a grace to be here with you. So grateful for your voice and your leadership for so many of us all across Canada. Thank you, Lori.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Well, like my Canadian sister who has forged the way in so many ways for us as women in Canada, I thank you for who you are, Anne, and for your ministry.
So grateful to be on the journey with so many other sisters who are just pressing into Jesus, who is the way himself.
That's it. That's it. And Anne, your book, once again, Waymaker, finding the way to the life you've always dreamed of. I mean, isn't that all of our desires, right? But you've written this incredibly vulnerable story. A story of your marriage, a story of adoption of, a daughter with a literal broken heart, a story of your mom's being, put in a psychiatric hospital, of the death of your sister. I mean, you have gone to deep places. Why now? Why did you put it all in this book?
Oh, Lori, I just think that so many of us, all of us collectively, have gone through so much in the last 2 years. We have all experienced loss. We've all experienced grief on different levels. And even as we seem to move through this past season, we're facing global strife and war, and the future just seems really unknown. And I think then personally, all of us, no matter what it looks like on the outside to other people, all of us are going through our own hard battles. And I think sometimes when we look at screens, we think, well, everybody else has their life together, and it must just be me that doesn't have my life together. But to realize that we live in a broken world, and no matter what our stories is, each of us are facing suffering and obstacles. And it's not so much about why am I facing suffering, but what am I going to do in the midst of this suffering? Not so much how can I get out of this suffering, but how can I get out of this suffering so that I become more like Jesus through this suffering?
Yes, yes. You know what? When you told your story, you're so right. People can have a perception of someone, but we're
Yeah.
all on a journey. And we're
Yes.
all journeying through. That's why I share my personal story too, of our family and our kids and all that God has done, because God is so faithful no matter your story. And honestly, I couldn't put this book down. I can't put any of your books down, but honestly, this one, I'm like, I felt like, and I know you've written it as a love story.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really is a love story. It's a love story of you and your husband. It's a love story of finding and adopting your daughter, right? And we all want a great love story.
Yes.
But the truth is, like, how do we find and experience practically a love story in our life? So we look back and we don't have all these regrets. How do we find that?
Well, I think I wanted really to write a story, Lori, that captures our imagination, because we follow one who is the Word, and he is writing a love story into each of our lives. So beyond my own love story with my husband, which had a lot of detours and was not linear in any way, I just in lots of ways just about blew up our marriage, and a lot of obstacles in adopting our daughter, who had this literal half of a heart. How do we actually fall in love with Jesus himself? When you pick up Waymaker, it's a love story between you and your maker. What does that look like practically, Lori? I think for us to realize that in the midst of all of our own love stories, there really are no standing lovers, is what I write in Waymaker, that the only way to love is to really lay down our agendas, to lay down our plans, to practically think of ourselves less, because self forgetfulness is the way to happiness. How do we actually live formed and shaped like a cross. I write in Waymaker. How do we live shaped cruciform with our arms stretched out to God and to people in that posture of cruciformity, which is ultimately a posture of vulnerability. We're not trying to put our arms in front of our hearts to shield and protect or take care of ourselves, not trying to be about self preservation or self salvation, but in that posture of cruciformity, of our arms outstretched, that posture of vulnerability, that's the posture that leads us to the life we're ultimately dreaming of, which is intimacy with God and with God's people.
Mm.
The way through that we're really looking for isn't so much a place, but the promise of his presence himself. And we only get to that place through the posture of cruciformity, vulnerability, intimacy with God and people.
Oh man, you're so right. It's a
Mm.
place we don't want to go to because of
Oh,
self,
yes,
right? We want to
yes,
self-protect. I'm the
yes,
queen of self-protection now,
yes, yeah.
right?
And Waymaker really tells the story about how I want to self-preserve, how I want to not reach outward and reach to God and to people, but I wanted to turn inward to
Yes.
protect myself. And that's our default is to turn inward and to self-protect. And in doing that, we actually, for me, that all I say in Waymaker, all of life turns on the turn. Are we going to turn outward or are we going to turn inward? And my story, Waymaker really unpacks my turning inward was about turning towards addictions in all kinds of ways that didn't actually lead to God's presence, but I actually literally, not to the promised land, but I actually literally wildernessed myself in
Mm.
so many ways, Lori. So painful, but I wanted to tell a vulnerable story so that people, like C.S. Lewis says, we read to know that we're not alone. And I
Yeah.
wanted the reader to know that when we hit no ways, our default can be to turn in ways to escape pain, to numb out, to try to fill ourselves up with things that ultimately aren't going to fulfill, and to talk about how that led me to the bottom of a pit and how God himself led me out and into more of himself.
Oh man, I have been there. Everything you're saying, and that's why I think I couldn't put your book down because I found myself in it.
Yes. And I want
And
them to pick up the book, find themselves in it, and then to, on every page, do they encounter more of the way of Jesus himself?
yes, and to your point, when we lay ourselves down, when we lay our lives down, we find our lives. I mean, that's what Jesus says to us. Well, we're coming right back. We're coming right back for more. And I can't implore you enough to lean in and listen because this is the heart of God for you. We'll be right back. More with Ann Voskamp.